Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox-Bolton of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals, to state senators, to mayors, to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about.
Welcome to An Honorable Profession. I'm Debbie Cox-Bolton, CEO of the New Deal. We're proud to support some of the amazing leaders you hear on this podcast. In this episode, I talk with Phyllis Dickerson, CEO of the African American Mayors Association. It was great to hear from her, particularly during Black History Month, about the important role her organization plays in supporting and lifting up Black mayors, about some of the issues that our mayors are most focused on, and about the progress being made electing more African Americans, particularly a record number of Black women, as mayors across the country. I think you'll also love hearing about Phyllis's unusual path into government and public service, and stories she shared from throughout her career, which started in the fashion industry and included doing advance for the Clintons and the Obamas, as well as her vision for the African American Mayors Association in the coming years. Phyllis Dickerson, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Thank you, Debbie, for having me.
It's so nice to talk to you. And I'm excited to talk to you because you, of course, as I said in the intro, are the head of the African American Mayors Association, AMA, which we are honored to work with at New Deal. And I wanted to just start by asking you a little bit about the organization, kind of the evolution and its goals.
Yeah. So early on, there was an organization called the Southern Conference of Black Mayors. Back then, you only saw Black mayors in southern cities like Louisiana, places like that. That's when people like Congressman Benny Thompson was a mayor in his city. And then it evolved to the U.S. Conference of Black Mayors because you start to see African-American mayors get elected in major cities like Mayor Stokes in Cleveland and places like that. And so then you evolve to where you are now, which is the African American Mayors Association. Then you see most of the big city mayors are African American. In fact, the top 4 cities in the U.S., New York, Mayor Eric Adams, Chicago, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, and then, of course, Houston, Mayor Sylvester Turner. So the only place we don't have a Black mayor in the top 4 right now is Los Angeles, and maybe that'll happen real soon. So, but of the top 20 cities around the U.S., we actually represent 45% of those cities with African-American mayors.
That's amazing. Before you tell me a little bit more about the organization, I just want to stop there and ask you about this kind of trend of African-American mayors being elected in these cities, and in particular, women mayors. You mentioned Lori Lightfoot, but, Keisha Lance Bottoms in Atlanta, London Breed in San Francisco, our very own New Deal leader, Tashara Jones in St. Louis, first Black woman to be elected in St. Louis. Really, in the last few years, right, it seems like there's just been a real increase. And it's so exciting to see. What do you think's going on? What do you attribute that to?
Well, I think Black women have always been in leadership. It's just that they're moving into a different area of leadership. You just saw in Durham, Mayor O'Neill get elected, the first Black female mayor in Durham. It's unfortunate, and we keep saying the first, because we have Val Lyles in Charlotte. We have, as you said, Tashara in St. Louis. So they're there. We just don't highlight them as much. They're doing the work on the ground, London Breed in San Francisco. So they're in major markets and major cities. Mayor Bowser right here in the district. And so they're there. Through AMA, we make them more visible, raise their profile, things like that. But it is a movement across the board, not just in gender Pacific, but just being African-American, period. I think people are starting to see the movement.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm hoping this is a portends things to come, right? We talk so much about making sure that our elected representatives look like America. And, there's just been such a lack of representation for so long. So to see this kind of, it is a movement, and it's well overdue, to your point. Like, we keep saying the first Black woman. That's, we need to get to a place where we're not saying that anymore, right? So
correct.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you, back to AMA for a second, second, Phyllis. So tell us a little bit about now, what is it, the work that you do? How do you organize and how do you work with the mayors?
So it is a membership-based organization for African-American mayors only. We do a few things. We represent over 500 mayors across the U.S. We advocate for policy on the federal level. We do some training and development with our mayors because, of course, as some people may know, some of them are getting younger and younger. And we share best practices. This year, we're going to focus on 5 pillars, one being climate and environmental justice, the second one being revitalization and community safety. We're going to focus on health, infrastructure, and then the last one, voting rights and civic engagement.
I love it. And how do you pick the priorities that are going to, be the ones for the year or the cycle or however you think about it?
So we actually sent out a survey to our mayors and we asked them their priority areas. And so between, us on the staff side, sitting down, having a strategy meeting, and then asking the mayors where their priorities were and where their issues are in their particular cities, then this is how we came up with those 5 focus areas.
Yeah. And you do have leadership. I think you mentioned when you said Mayor of Houston, Sylvester Turner is your current chair, and that's a 1-year position. Is that right?
Yeah, so Mayor Turner Houston is our president this year. And then next year, Mayor Frank Scott in Little Rock will be president, actually for the new year. So he actually comes in April. Our conference is in April in DC, April 27th through 29th at the Washington Hilton. And so Mayor Frank Scott Jr. of Little Rock will be the incoming president.
Got it. And, another thing I know that you do, as we all do for people who run organizations who work with elected officials around the country, it's kind of an exciting time to be working at the state and local level, particularly as so much federal money is now coming to states and localities through things like the American Rescue Plan, infrastructure bill. How do you coordinate with with Congress, with the White House? How does that work for you all?
So on the White House side, I probably have weekly calls with Gabe and his team on intergovernmental affairs for the president. And then I'll always have a call or at least an email once a week from the agencies, whether it be Department of Transportation or Department of Labor, or whoever, Homeland Security this week. So they reach out, they keep the communication open, and they ask what the issues are. So for us, the issues are sometimes it's the pass-through money when mayors don't necessarily have a great relationship with their governor. Another point, it could be the formula that we use for allocation. Sometimes the formula isn't equitable, so the allocation won't be equitable. And sometimes it's the lack of technical assistance. Many of our cities need that technical assistance side to help with the drawdown of the funding, the application process, and then the tracking piece.
Yeah. You mentioned equity, and I'm glad you did because, again, it's fun to talk to you. I usually am talking to elected officials. I have to say this. And, you, like me, run an organization that works with elected officials. So it's an interesting, we have more of a similar way of thinking about things, right, in the big picture. But so I'm curious for you. For me, it's been such a great, just exciting time to be working so closely with the White House and with Congress and all these elected officials. But as we, come out of COVID, one of the things that's on our mind, and I wonder about for you, very much is how COVID laid bare all these longstanding inequities. We knew were there already, but, things, access to broadband, access to healthcare, so many, which in particular, we know affects communities of color. So I'm curious for you, how do you think about equity in terms of all the policy issues that your mayors are working on, and how important it is to the mayors that you're working with?
It's funny that you do mention COVID. So let me start there first. So before I came to AMA, my company actually had the contract with Arkansas Department of Health to do the implementation process for vaccinations in majority minority areas in Arkansas. And we saw the inequity there first. Just the allocation of vaccination, the process. If you don't have a device and you don't have broadband, then how do you register to get vaccinated? So that was like the first inequity. So we had to do something different. We have to look at the culture in which we're trying to speak to. And so for vaccinations, I went to those mayors in the Mississippi Delta, because Arkansas and Mississippi border each other. And I talked to those mayors, and we pulled pulled in the faith-based community, and the ministers in those areas got their church members registered. We found a big gym or a community center. We brought in the vaccinations and we lined them up and started vaccinating them. And so, sometimes you just have to not use the same old tool that's in place and think about how do we create equity when it's really not there. Okay. And sometimes it's even like for the federal level, it's the match funds. So, some cities don't have the match, that 80-20, like, how do I come up with that 20%? And what does that look like? And so for us, it could be thinking outside the box on the public-private sector. Is there a private sector company that can help you with the match, or a foundation or things like that? So you just have to think a little bit differently in order to get the same results.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Let me ask you another question about AMA. You work with both, it's bipartisan, correct? Or is it not?
Nonpartisan.
Nonpartisan. I'm sorry. And a lot of mayors run in nonpartisan offices, obviously. So mayors are kind of unique, and some municipal electeds as well. But so, in this culture where there's so much, distrust and division in the parties, how do you, as a person who runs a nonpartisan organization, think about working with the mayors, and how do they work together across kind of those party lines, even though they're not, officially partisan? They are Democrats or Republicans. How does that work?
So for me personally, let me start there. I was a former chief of staff and for Mayor in Little Rock, Mark Stodola at the time. I had the pleasure of working for three mayors. So Mayor Jim Daley, Mark Stodola, and then I have Frank Scott with his transition. So I had the pleasure of working for all three. And most of our issues are not Republican and Democrat. They're just issues. Like, people just want their trash picked up. People want their roads fixed. That's not blue or red. And so even for my governor, Asa Hutchinson in Arkansas, when he hired his first female chief of staff, I sent Allison a note. And I said, welcome to the girls club. Let me know if you want to have lunch. The next day, literally, she emailed me and said, Phyllis, are you ready to have lunch? And so she needed to, talk about things that are maybe women-specific issues and with women that are in high-level positions. We built that partnership. We still are friends today. And guess what? Now her governor is president of National Governors Association. And so when I came here, one of the people that I met was the CEO of the National Governors Association, because Allison made that introduction. And so we just have to explain to people, this is not red or blue. We serve we have a commonality here, and it's public service is what we do. We service our constituents. And so sometimes we just have to put what I call the dumb stuff aside and get the work done. And I think that's where mayors are right now. And it doesn't work out in every state and every city. Sometimes it's a harder sell to get that relationship fostered with that governor, but it doesn't mean that we don't give up trying.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do love, one of the things I love about mayors, is that they are, the backstops in their cities, right? The pothole gets filled or it doesn't, and the mayor's fault. A lot of the mayors we work with at NewDEAL will tell us that, it's, they see the people in the grocery store, they're going to be held accountable. Like you said, not red, not blue, just did you get the job done? And that's a unique thing. And, whether, a little bit different than if you're a state legislator or a member of Congress, the mayor, on the ground. So I hear you on that front. It's like, they just have to find a way to get it done. Right. And so, as chief of staff for the mayors you mentioned in Little Rock, what was that like, and what was, what did you see in terms of a mayor's mindset in terms of just how they were going to solve problems, or kind of what did you learn from being in that role?
So I guess what I learned most is how you foster relationship. So I was born and raised in Little Rock. So I graduated from the famous Little Rock Central High, where the Little Rock Nine graduated from. And so I had the pleasure of being homebred. A lot of people fly in and become chief of staff, but it was home for me. So the relationships on the ground as relates to the citizens already had in place. The relationships I didn't have were more like the governor's office and things like that. And then also building those federal relationships. So now it's coming together in one place. I had the pleasure, as you know, of working for the Clintons and the Obamas And then I had the pleasure of working for Mike Bloomberg. And so it's so funny now because all those people have now reached out and want to be partners with AMA in some level. And so with that in mind, it was really about fostering relationships. And so for Mayor Scott, he was here a couple of weeks ago for U.S. Conference of Mayors. And we went, and I told Department of Labor, like, we got to start having secretaries go to Little Rock, right? And talk about the work they're doing. And so now Secretary Wash is going to Little Rock.
A former mayor himself.
Just building those relationships, I think, is what I learned the most. I have 3 cell phones. Everybody laughs at it. But the number one joke with my friends is, Phyllis, when you die, who's going to get possession of your cell phones? And I'm like, the relationships only matter because they're me, not because there's somebody else. But yes, I can't even tell you how many contacts I have in my cell phone.
Well, it is a big part of these jobs, right? Is making those connections and figuring out how to leverage different relationships and organizations to get the work done. So I hear you. You mentioned the Clintons and the Obamas. You have a really interesting path into public service, which we talked about when we first met. And I'd love you to share that story a little bit. You did not start your career thinking you were going to go into working in government or with elected officials. Tell me about it.
So my mother actually worked in government, in state government, in city government, and in county government. So I grew up in it. My mother was over, like some people will know, the butter and cheese program. She was over the energy assistance program. And so I used to volunteer. In fact, I got fired by my mom as a volunteer. I was like, you do know I'm not getting paid. But I actually started in fashion. Fashion is my first love. And so I did fashion for about 20 years, opening stores and things like that. For Gap Corporation, I worked for Neiman Marcus. I was a professional model for 10 years. And then their position came open. It was a limited service position with the city of Little Rock. And they asked if they were advertising the position for the event person to coordinate the 50th anniversary of the Little Rock Nine. So I actually got into the government based on that. But along the path, I actually did the grand opening for President Clinton. Right after he came out of office, he did the grand opening of the Clinton Library. And I saw this guy named Greg Hale doing advance. I didn't know what he was doing. And I was like, who is he? And they said, that's Hale. And I said, Hale? They were like, not Hell, Hale. I said, oh, okay. I want to do what he's doing. I didn't know my job was important. I was doing hotels. So I did hotels for the VIPs. And but I saw Greg Hale do this position called advance. And I said, well, I want to do what he's doing. And so after the library opening, I got trained to do advance. You had to do background checks and all that. And I became one of the advance people for President Clinton. So every time he would come to Arkansas, I would do his trip, right? And then they took me on the road. So I think the one of the most logistical nightmare events to ever do for President Clinton is a funeral, because everybody knows him, right? Especially a funeral in Arkansas or a relative funeral. And then after that, Hillary ran for president the first time. And I said, I think I want to go and see what it's like to be on the road. I will say it's a lot different, because when you're at home, you have all your, logistical skills, you have all your contacts. But when you're on the road, you got to create those relationships. So I did her for 2 years. When her first presidential election, I felt like I didn't have closure. I was like, for the first time, I'm like, something's not right. Like, I don't know why I don't have closure. And I asked God, I said, what is wrong? And he said, the only way you learn how to work for a first lady is to work for a former first lady. That's literally what God spoke to me. And I said, am I going to work for Mrs. Obama? And the Lord didn't reply. So for a year, I just kept telling people, I'm going to work for Mrs. Obama. And everybody thought I was crazy. A year later, I was coming back on a plane and I got an email that said, hi, Phyllis. My name is Alan Fisk, Director of Scheduling Advance for Michelle Obama. I heard you would like to do advance for her. And I did my first trip for her. I went to Africa with her. I was on advance to kick off her Let's Move, her military initiative with her, and now First Lady Biden, all those things. So I had an amazing life, from local government to advance and all those things in between.
That is an amazing story. And I just love that fashion it was the first love. I mean, and we talk a lot on this show about, how people come into government, and it's not, I mean, there are people who, do maybe more what you expect. You worked on a campaign, maybe went to law school, whatever it was, but, and that's fantastic. But, there are also people who come from all walks of life. And so, I think it's also like never too late, right? If you feel like, a call to serve, you feel like there's an opportunity that suits you or a job that suits you, you got to go for it, right? I mean, that is just such an amazing story, and how much you got to see. Is there a trip or an experience during your advanced years that you can kind of remember as one of your favorites, or something that you would want to share that maybe would surprise people about what it looks like to do advance?
I think advance is so ugly behind the scenes that we all have war stories. I think a Clinton war story is we did the funeral for his stepfather. We used the hearse from President Reagan. It had only been used at one time. And when we got ready to get in the car after the funeral service to go to the burial, the battery died.
Oh my goodness.
So we had to use the trooper's car to jump it off. And we had them all in the car, like ready to take off. And then when we had to stop, then they all jumped out of the car. He, Chelsea, and Hillary. And then we had to like wrangle everybody back into the car. Then everybody started coming out the church, and they all waited to laugh and talk. And I'm like, are you guys kidding me? So those are some of like examples of like, you can plan the best possible event, and you can only control what you can control. I think my best trip was probably going to Africa with Mrs. Obama. That was one of her first international trips without the president. It was a beautiful weekend. We actually spent 2 weeks there getting ready for it. And then she was there a week, of course, and she brought the girls and her mom. And so we did some amazing things. Everything was about mentorship with young girls. And so she did like a luncheon. We did a collaboration with Botswana and Baylor University on some of their HIV and AIDS issues. She painted a mural on the wall there. I mean, it was just such a great trip.
Amazing. That's so amazing.
And it was my first time to Africa. I did the Botswana leg of the trip. And I felt like I had come home. I hit the ground and I remember shedding a tear, and I told everybody I was there to meet my cousins. And so everywhere I went, people would say, "Hey, cousin," because it just got around the city that I was there meeting my cousins.
I love it. Oh my gosh. That is an amazing, amazing story. What would you tell people who, are interested in doing some kind of, you went 0 to 60, right? You were, you didn't start small. You went straight to advance for the presidents. But, for anybody who's interested in, in doing public service and working with elected officials, like, what did you learn from your transition from a different industry? And what would you tell people that are interested in doing that kind of thing?
My number one line is trust the process, because sometimes it doesn't make sense. Like, how did I get here? And so when I did new store openings, those were logistical skills that I was honing in on. I don't know if you've ever opened like a big box store that's 25,000 square feet just on floor space, but that's a lot of merchandise rolling in at one time. And so where does every sock go? Where does every pair of jeans go? How do they get folded? Where's the back stock going? All of those things, you're working out the logistics. So it's the same skill sets that you take over to the next position, which was like the 50th anniversary of the Little Rock Nine. How many people are going to fit on the front line of Central Hot? 5,000. How many media are going to show up? 400. And how do they file their stories? Like, all the little details were part of the training, right? And then advance just took me to that next level. What is that? What I call the 30-second shot that you're going to see on the front page of the paper or on the new 5 o'clock news? What is that money shot going to look like? Is it somebody shaking their hand? Is it somebody hugging them? Is it them waving while they come on stage? What is the money shot? And so you do all of that work to get the right story, to get that money shot.
Yeah. And when you look back on your career, there's so many different aspects of what you've done in logistics, and then being a chief of staff and policy, and there's so many different pieces of what you've done in your career. What is it that you're kind of think that is going to serve you best as you're in this role, which is relatively new still, as head of the African American Mayor Association? Kind of what are the skills you think that are most relevant to kind of the role and the charge you've been given as the new leader of this organization?
I don't know about other people, but mine is I just trust God. No matter what happens, whether it's a high or a low, it's the spiritual part of me. I trust God in every aspect because I ask him to make each moment a teachable moment and make sure that I learn the lesson while I'm there. Because once you learn the lesson, then he jumps you to the next phase.
It's beautiful.
Some people keep being, staying and they keep repeating the same lesson over and over, and they're wondering why they don't move ahead. Because you're not asking to actually learn the lesson.
Do you have some of the goals you're thinking about for AMA as you look ahead a little bit? Like where would you like to see AMA go? We talked about it, the evolution a little bit at the beginning. Where would you like to see it go over the next few years?
I think it's almost getting there. Like I want to see us to take over all the top 10 cities in the U.S., right? So if we get LA, then that gives us that springboard to take over the rest, right? And then the second thing is on the fundraising side. Like I have a Phyllis goal that I want us to get to, so that the breadth of what we do is just wide open. I want to have some conversations that have never been had before. Yesterday, I was talking to Mayor Suarez in Miami. He's so hyped because I just asked him to have a conversation about cryptocurrency with Mayor Eric Adams, because they both get either their full salary or half their salary in Bitcoin. And so nobody even knows what it is. And so let's just have that sit down conversation. So he escalated that from we're just going to have a conversation to we're going to have a whole cryptocurrency conference in Miami with Black mayors in July. And so just talking about some things that are important, voters' rights. We're talking to Atlanta now about hosting a voters' rights piece in Atlanta with Georgia mayors, because that's where a lot of the issues are going to be coming into the new election cycle. Mayors like Van Johnson in Savannah, Hardy Davis in Augusta, the new East Point, Georgia Mayor Dickens in Atlanta, just having that conversation and educating people on what the issues are. And I think that from the federal level, we use so much jargon and trigger words, just breaking down a focus also on the public engagement side of explaining why that issue is imperative and what's important.
Yeah.
And what's at stake right now.
Yeah, what is at stake right now, which is a lot. There are so many major issues. Maybe I'll end on this question. Again, take advantage of having a fellow CEO on the program. I have my own answer to this question, but why do you think it's so important to have organizations like ours where elected officials can come together, share best practices, be together? Why should people understand why that's so important for elected leaders?
Because the weight of the job. I tell people the weight of the job is intense. Right now, mayors are dealing with economic development issues as it relates to COVID. They're dealing with COVID. And people forget they're human too. They lost family members. I know the mayor of West Memphis, I think 4 of his family members passed away during COVID. So the weight of the job is heavy. And so with that in mind, sometimes they just need to bump an ideal off of another mayor. So can they pick up the phone? Do they have another mentor mayor that gets it? Because issues in our urban cities may be different from our issues in our rural cities. Now, we cover mayors from the big cities, the mid-sized cities, and the small cities. But, right now, community safety is an issue across the board. So how are you using your opera dollars to leverage public safety right now? Are you putting more money in YIP programs or PIT programs? Are you putting some money over here in human trafficking? Are you putting any money over here to talk about gun safety? And like in New York, it's illegal to own a handgun, but you go to Arkansas and they own handguns like they own golf clubs in California. And so the issue is different. So California, they may not have the huge gun issue, but unless you go to a specific city like LA, right? Where it's a little bit more urban city as opposed to some of the suburbs and things like that. Whereas in the South, everybody owns a gun because it's a way of life. You get a gun when you're 5 because you hunt, because hunting is a sport in the South, right? But why, besides hunting, can we talk about being responsible gun owners as opposed to getting rid of guns, period? Because that's more than likely, that's not going to happen in the South.
Yeah. I mean, what really resonates with me, Phyllis, is what you said is, particularly now, I mean, it's a weighty job anytime, but what elected officials have had to go through over the last couple of years during COVID, governing in these completely unprecedented times, and frankly, often with a backdrop of vitriol, where the decisions you're making, are not, if, you've got people on both sides yelling at you all the time. And, and I think that there is really we have to remember these are, as you said, these people are human beings. They're stepping up to serve their city or their state or their country, whatever it is. And they are, in your case, a city, and they need that kind of support and that respite and that place to find ideas, right? Because it's a hard job. It's, people think it's so glamorous. It's a hard job. You know that. You were chief of staff for a mayor. It is a hard job. Your job was a hard job. His job was a hard job. So I just want to thank you for all the work that you're doing with AMA. I'm so glad that NewDEAL and AMA are finding ways to partner. And, hopefully over the coming years, we're going to be able to make a real dent in trying to put forward policies that are going to make, communities better and safer all over this country. So thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Debbie, for having me.
It was great fun to talk to you. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening to An Honorable Profession. Please subscribe to hear more amazing leaders and keep asking your elected officials to be honorable. Boots Row Group produces podcast. I'm Ryan Coonerty, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars were used in the making of this podcast.